Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a fantastic guest today, a founder of creative agency Intents and Purposes. They received the Governor General's Gold Medal for their research into design for social impact, social innovation, and sustainability. They're the author of the bestseller, The Conscious Creative Practical Ethics for Purposeful Work. With a new book coming for 2023, please join me in welcoming Kelly Small. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for having me.
You ready for your 20 questions?
Okay, let's go. Let's do
Okay.
this.
Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
All right. So I wear a few hats. I'm a designer, I'm a creative director, I am an author, as you mentioned, and I'm also an educator now. So my day job is that I work with big brands, whether that's in the public or private sectors, to really fulfill their business objectives, but also working toward, larger goals of improved futures. And by that, I mean, things like inclusivity and belonging and anti-oppression and sustainability.
That's awesome. Just a note for our audience. I think I came to know your work when I went to Chapters Indigo on Robson and saw your book there and bought a copy and then went back and bought like 5 or 6 copies to give to friends. I loved it so much.
That's so
Um,
kind of you. Thank you, Thomas. I love it.
Number two is what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
All right. I love this question. I also, I'm not sure if probably not the only person who thinks this way, but a piece of knowledge that really drives my work is the idea of dialectical thinking. And it was one of those things. So the idea of holding, that two seemingly opposing ideas can be true at the same time really transformed my work. I mean, I am a non-binary person. My philosophies are all very outside of binary ways of thinking. And I think once we can hold that, multiple realities can be happening at the same time, for example, like something you can work in an agency or a firm, for example, that is ethical and unethical at once. Once I was able to wrap my head around this fact that there is no such thing as this sort of perfectly ethical, sustainable place where we will arrive as a creative person, it really took a lot of pressure off me to be able to affect smaller, more incremental changes as I was going throughout my career.
That makes a lot of sense because at one point you were really reinventing yourself, right? Like as a creative.
I was, yeah. I started out. I mean, I was a graphic designer by trade, communication designer, and then became a creative director in like big business, serving folks like big telcos and car companies, and selling a lot of goods and participating in systems that were really, really challenging to me from a values perspective. I felt like I had to be kind of a different person in the professional world than I was in my personal life. And so I did. I went back to school and did a master's of design at Emily Carr in order to really start to explore what it might look like to use these creative skills that I had attained over the years in service to something other than, manufacturing uh, desire for products that people didn't really need, or in many cases were actually quite harmful to them and to society as a whole. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful to be on the other side of that in this sort of post reinvention where I am much more committed and focused on a client base that is, doing work that I feel a lot better about participating in.
That's great. You'll see in one of the later questions, but a common response to one of them is how hard it is to do work that goes against what your values are. Number three is why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Well, I mean, part of it, I think, to keep it real, has to be around, around the fact that, I'm not one of those people that sort of rides the line of being able to be very good at a lot of different things. I am not a polymath. I am not someone who really was very successful in like the maths and the sciences of the world. I was always going to be going into the arts. That was clear, whether it was going to be writing, art, design, and I'm very fortunate now to have built a career that allows me to touch on so many different areas of the arts. I moved around a lot in my career when I was working for other folks in agencies and creative firms, and I got to touch everything from experience design through to like real digital innovation, doing event work, selling packaged goods, you kind of name it. And so I've developed this, toolbox and skill set that allows me to work for just about any kind of client and be able to offer them, you know, types of design that are appropriate for them. And what it does for me is keeps things interesting enough that I'm able to do a little bit of all of that, in my career and in my daily life. It's honestly such a gift.
That's great. Number four is, what does your future look like?
Big question. Very big question. I think I'll answer this one with, obviously I have absolutely no idea. There are, innumerable futures in front of me, that I am very grateful to have access to. I think I have access to them, and I am open to what comes my way. And now, all that to say, I am not the kind of person that's kind of just like waiting around to let things happen. But I want to stay open to what feels good at the time. I think I have fallen victim, if you can even call it that. I've been trapped by thinking that I could perfectly curate my life and future. I think this is something that a lot of creative people, a lot of designers, I've had my therapists, numerous therapists have told me this. You're a designer, you're trying to design your life. It's not possible. And so I keep trying to be a little bit more comfortable, we'll say, in the ambiguity of the everyday and trying to stay really in touch with my values, my priorities, and allowing those things to dictate the future. So, whereas 10 years ago, I probably would have told you some grandiose story about a professional future that is very shiny and fancy. Now I might be a little bit more hopeful for something that is more well-rounded, where my personal life and my family life are very nicely balanced with a fulfilling professional career that isn't necessarily in the spotlight, but is simply something that I enjoy doing every day and can forge real emotional, healthy relationships with like my clients and colleagues and vendors and all of the rest of the folks that, I work with to make these projects happen.
That's great. I heard you say in another interview about how it's no longer about this ivory tower perfection, and now it's much more collaborative. That's something I think about a lot these days too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the notion of that like omnipotent design expert who walks into the room and gathers a little bit of information and then goes away and makes magic happen behind the scenes. I would like to believe that's dead. I
Mhm.
think it's all about collaboration and being deeply involved with stakeholders, end users, the folks who are going to be beneficiaries, hopefully, of the work that we do, as well as a much deeper sort of client collaboration. And those always, in my experience anyway, tend to be the projects that are the most successful in the end and the most fulfilling because you've built real human relationships while doing this hopefully world changing work.
Great. Okay. Five is one of my favorite questions. So let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
This is a really interesting question, and I don't think that I have spent a great deal of time thinking about place. I and placemaking and location. I grew up moving around a lot,
Mm,
and so I s sort of came up with this or grew up with this idea that it didn't really matter where I was,
mm,
that location didn't matter. And I don't really subscribe to that anymore. I think, okay, professionally, I can work from anywhere. I am fortunate that way with what I do, particularly post-pandemic,
mm,
where so much has moved online.
mm,
But I am finding myself much more rooted in the community that I live in now. I think that started actually when I lived in Vancouver and I was, a member of the West End community and, just off of Davie Street, and started to understand more about the unceded territory that
mm,
is what we call Vancouver. And so I've brought that back to Toronto with me. And it's really early days, and it's not something that I think I can talk about with a great deal of authority. I feel like I am a student of placemaking. I know it's something that gets talked about at Emily Carr a lot, and I
mm,
would love to learn more about it. But the things that I think I have gleaned so far is the incredible importance of understanding our relationship to the land. I
mm,
think the incredible importance of being a participating member of a community and not just a person who happens to live here, but someone who contributes and notices and tries to be in their community mindfully.
mm.
Outside of that, it's a lot of question marks, and I'll just, keep trying to learn more about that.
Great. Six is if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Oh, so many things. So many things. This is not going to be particularly quotable because I think it comes from someone else, but I think do you like I would like grab myself gently by the shoulders and shake a little bit and say like please just go out there and be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Um, the reality was, I think, especially coming up when I did that, being my whole self, that is, a let's say neurospicy, non-binary, trans, queer person it was not always safe to be fully present and out as my full self.
Mm,
But I wish that more of myself had been embraced and I hadn't spent so much looking externally for what I was supposed to become, and instead honing the things that made me different and made me special while learning from those other people and not trying to sort of be or mimic that. It took a lot of unlearning for me to get back to a place where I felt like I was living authentically and showing up in rooms as me and feeling like I even had the right to show up and share the ideas that I had for a great deal of my career. I really and truly had this core belief that what I had to say didn't particularly matter. And I think, a lot of that comes from, all of us being stuck in systems of oppression that really reinforce those ideas. So, I don't really hold it against myself. I'm not shocked that that happened. And I think that happens to a lot of people with all sorts of different intersecting identities. But yeah, just please do you, be you, show up as you.
that's great. Seven is what's a day in your life like?
Ooh, a day in my life it's quite variable, I have to say. And I do that very intentionally because I get bored very easily. So let's say an average day in the life is like, I will say formally, so you have a point of comparison. I used to just get up, go straight to the computer, and work all day until about 10 p.m.
Mm.
So that is unsustainable, obviously. And I really burned out from that approach. And so now I get up, I go for a long walk with my dog. I often listen to a podcast, or I just go without headphones. And one of my favorite things is to just like meet up with the kind of everyday other dog walkers in the neighborhood, like the other, neighbors, saying hi, having a little chat. It's such a nice way to start the day. And then come home, I eat breakfast now. Like, what a concept. And I do that mindfully, not sitting at the computer. And then, I sit down and I start working, around 9 o'clock, and I work from like 9 to 12. That usually looks like, answering emails, connecting with clients, sometimes holding brainstorm sessions, meeting with, new potential collaborators, because Intents and Purposes operates as a collective. I'm always trying to meet up with other values driven creatives to do work with. Um, I stop for lunch now again, which is like the silliest thing, but has been so transformative to like actually eat food, and I don't get headaches the way I used to, because I'm not just living on coffee. The rest of the day is more of the same. Sometimes I go work in a coffee shop. Sometimes I'll take an afternoon off to go for a long walk with a friend, or to pop over to see someone who's been, having a hard um, I think I have now built in this variability that allows for rest and recharging and filling my cup back up, so that when I sit down and I'm ready to get the work done, I find that it flows much, much easier. And I'm really grateful to be, working for myself now, and to be able to have built that in, because it's a massive game changer. Oh, and then I always end the day with a little bit of yoga. Always.
That's
That just keeps me feeling amazing, and like very, very low stakes yoga. I'm not one of those people that has like all the fancy outfits and like goes to a class, but just do it at home. And I find it's a good way to unwind.
awesome. Number 8 is lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
Hmm. Uh, so I am sometimes, I think, connected to a fault. I have far too many Google uh, alerts set up. I get way too many e-newsletters. I listen to so many podcasts. I am constantly reading nonfiction. Um, it's, none of it is a real sort of surprising answer. I think it's just staying connected, but then also I think attitudinally, it's about not putting pressure on yourself to consume all of it. I think it can be, we know that we are all bombarded by something like up to 10,000 messages a day. That's too many. And then we start adding more to it, because lifelong learning and this continued education, is such a popular topic and such an expectation of us, on top of our day jobs and our hobbies and the rest of the things that we do. I think it's great to stay connected, get it coming into your inbox, keep tabs on the books you want to read, and then do it when you feel for it. Just I think it's really, really key not to be forcing it, and to make sure, I'm evangelical about rest now, especially following burnout. I think it is essential. If folks haven't heard of the NAP ministry, their tagline is rest as resistance, or rest is resistance. It's absolutely brilliant, and really worth checking them out on Instagram or on their blog.
You read my mind. I was thinking about naps at that point.
I don't know what that says about our podcast here.
Just about halfway here. Number nine, what tools do you use? Are you digital and analog?
I am predominantly digital. I have always kind of I've always gone in that direction. I mean, definitely I sketch, I write by hand sometimes, but for the most part, I am the full Adobe suite, sometimes Figma. I use Miro for whiteboarding. I use Slack to keep up with all of the folks who participate in Intents and Purposes. Um, there are probably all sorts. I mean, the full Google suite. There are so many um, tools to be used now that sometimes I have to go back and like check out all of my subscriptions and make sure I'm not like overdoing it. But it's great. I mean, I'm very, very grateful for the ability to be able to literally pick up my laptop and go anywhere, to be able to travel. Not that I have done that recently, but when I do again, and to be able to work in any time zone, like it's just I'm grateful for it. And I also, because I think I'm a bit of an introverted person, honestly, and it takes a lot out of me to be in a very fast-paced, very loud, intense environment. And so because of all of these tools, I'm able to take care of myself in a way that makes life and work feel more sustainable and more balanced.
Nice segue to number 10. How do you deal with work-life balance?
Yeah, I think like this has been kind of the topic of the essay throughout. Just, I think because of where I am in my life right now, it I deal with it by working consistently. I think it's a practice. I don't think it's a destination. Working pretty diligently to always ask the question, like, what are my priorities? What are my values? Am I living those values? Am I living those priorities? And if I am not, I can usually feel it. Like I can feel that sort of like twinge of anxiety in my stomach when things are feeling a little out of whack or a little too fast. And so I think it comes from a connectedness with oneself
Mhm.
and staying intuitive and listening to our bodies. And for me, that's really been, I think, the key, and then the rest falls into place.
I love that. Number 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Great question. I used to say that I would be writing full time, but every time I sit down to write, including the book that I'm writing right now, it's more of a challenge for me to get into that headspace and to start the work than it is for me with my creative direction and design work. And so I don't know, like maybe if that had been my primary thing, I would be doing it. I would love to be, my one of my heroes is Roxane Gay, and if I weren't doing what I'm doing right now, what I love to say, I would be doing some of the brilliant work that she is doing.
Mhm.
Like, yes, absolutely.
Nice. 12, what would you not like to do in terms of career?
Mm. Anything, anything having to do with math would make me really sad. So, being an accountant, I would be the world's worst accountant. Um, Nobody would hire me, and they would be correct doing so. So, I think anything kind of in that realm where I think as well, like anything, like maybe legal stuff would be a bit rough as well. I struggle with notions of professionalism that can be very rooted in certain like industries and ways of working. I've read a couple of really interesting articles. There's one in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in particular that talks about how professionalism as we know it is this very white male cis straight sort of hangover
Mm,
from the early days of quote unquote professional life.
mm,
And we are taking all of those ideals and placing them on communities of people for whom they simply don't fit. And so I felt in my life, especially working for a big business, like felt very, very oppressed by the expectations that were placed on me. And I say that as a white person with a ton of privilege that comes with that. I know the article that I read that I'm referencing in particular talked a lot about the Black community and, how things like natural hairstyles have been considered by some people to be not professional. That is probably the best example I can give you as to why some of these notions of professional life are bullshit, and I would like to do away with them entirely. So I think anything that forced me to adhere to in order to be in this job, you have to dress this way or you have to present yourself that way would not work for me. I need the fluidity and the openness to be able to be myself and to be able to freely challenge institutional norms. That's just how I am.
great. 13 is what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it is something I read fairly recently
Mm,
by Billy Ray Belcourt in his book of prose and poetry, what is it called? A history of my brief body. Beautiful if you can get your hands on it.
mm,
And toward the end of that book, he says that happiness is the greatest form of resistance. And I know there have been other quotes sort of in that vein over the years. And I just, I absolutely live for the idea that when we can fully live our whole, authentic lives and experience real joy, that is the greatest act of resistance against the oppressive systems that we are, in many ways largely trapped within. That is truly the way out.
great. Do you have a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Everything happens for a reason.
Mhm.
I don't love everything, and that's going to be a lot of people adhere to that. A lot of people love that and say it and find it very calming in moments where they need that. And I'm not, don't want to ever take that away from anyone. For me, I always felt like it pointed to a reason outside of my own agency
Mhm.
to impact life and my choices. So there was always something about it that just kind of hit me the wrong way.
Mhm. That makes sense. Number 15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Oof. I'm gonna say tenacious. I work really hard when I can work hard and I bounce back from hard things and I feel proud of myself for that.
What keeps you up at night?
Actually, nothing
Mm,
right now, which is a real privilege to be able to say. In the past, what would keep me up at night were very large presentations in front of like the president of a company where we were trying to sell through a big creative idea. Um, at this point, I'm sleeping, quite soundly.
mhm,
And I think that's because I have really looked deeply at the ways I needed to work in order to feel like I could find success. And by success, I don't necessarily mean like monetary success. I mean, feeling good on the daily and
mm.
creating a sustainable career for myself. So yeah, that's a bit of a gift right now.
Nice. What's the dream you're chasing?
I think one of the things that I dreamt about always was to write a book and to be published. And that happened in 2020 when House of Anansi picked up The Conscious Creative. And I'm just like still kind of floored when people reach out to me and, say something kind about the book or that it inspired them. It always blows my mind. I'm like, are you sure you're talking to me? Like, did this really happen? Was that a dream? And I think that piece is still something that I'm chasing. I think I would love to continue to write about not necessarily just ethics. I have a lot to say as well around like where we're going right now in diversity and inclusion and belonging, and where I think a lot of organizations are getting it wrong and sort of missing out on what it means to actually make communities feel safe in spaces. There are so many different topics that I would love to write about. So I think the dream is to have the freedom and the platform to be able to continue to share some of those thoughts, research deeply, and collaborate with some really smart folks to share some of those ideas in hopes that they, support other people in their careers.
I love it. Final stretch here, number 18. What inspires you?
Is it cliche to say that nature inspires me? Because that is the truth. I don't think there's anything that makes me feel as grounded or um, gives me the same level of perspective as I get from like walking through Stanley Park and just like putting my hands on a giant tree. Um, and it's lateral in that, not literal in that, I'm not getting this like flash of inspiration for the next big campaign that I'm doing, but I think inspiration for me comes from feeling like there is so much out there that is so much larger than myself and any sort of career and the things that, we humans get really caught up in. I find that it lends perspective to the creative problems or interventions that I'm looking to address when I can immerse myself in something so grand, and so large. Yeah.
I love that. I have such a kind of visual kind of response to that with your hands on the tree, kind of being inspired in that way. That's super interesting. Any advice you'd like to share?
I think the advice I'd like to share, particularly, I was being interviewed actually earlier today by a couple of amazing students from Durham College. And they asked me this question, and I gave them the advice that I would have given my younger self, which is to like radically be you as you embark on your career, as you enter into the industry. Um, and that doesn't mean radically in the sense of like, becoming too much of an anarchist and burning it all to the ground, but it means showing up in spaces and trusting that the things you have to say and your lived experience, you are the only person who has that perspective and that those viewpoints, and those are deeply deeply valuable. So please try. I know it's incredibly difficult to maintain your voice as you go out there, because it's everything.
Great. And number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? What's our call to action?
Yeah, so y'all can keep tabs on me at check out my website. So intensepurposes.co is where you can get me professionally. I'm also on Instagram at Kelly Small, on Twitter at Kelly_Small. You can get me on LinkedIn. I'm always open for conversations. So please, please, if it feels like something you'd like to do, don't hesitate to reach out. I always like to have new conversations.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kelly. I mean, when your first book came out, I was radically kind of moved in a way that could happen, that a person could release that kind of book and be so well received. It was really inspirational for me. I'm super excited for your 2023 book, and just hearing about your personal journey is really magical. So thank you so much for being on.
Oh, that's really kind, Thomas. Thanks for saying so. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.